What happens when America's sweetheart meets her match in an unexpected showdown that nobody saw coming? Picture this: Kelly Clarkson, the beloved pop icon and talk show host, sitting across from Carson Daly on the Today Show set. What should have been a routine interview about her latest album quickly spiraled into live television chaos. The cameras were rolling, millions were watching. And what unfolded next left everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about these two entertainment powerhouses. Asterisk. The morning began like any other at the Today Show studios in Rockefeller Plaza. Carson Daly, a seasoned television host and familiar face to millions, was preparing for what he assumed would be another pleasant celebrity interview. Kelly Clarkson had just released her 5th studio album, and her promotional tour was in full swing. Her publicist had arranged the appearance weeks in advance, and everything seemed perfectly orchestrated for a smooth, friendly conversation about music, motherhood, and her thriving career. Carson shuffled through his notes one last time. Glancing at the standard talking points, Kelly's journey from American Idol winner to Grammy-winning artist, her recent divorce, her successful daytime talk show, and, of course, the new album that was climbing the charts. He had interviewed Kelly before, and she was always professional, warm, and easygoing. There was no reason to expect anything different this time. Good morning and welcome back to Today. I'm Carson Daly. And joining me now is the incredibly talented Kelly Clarkson, he said with his trademark smile as the cameras began to roll. Kelly shifted in her chair, her usual bright demeanor seeming slightly strained around the edges. Thanks for having me, Carson. Always a pleasure to be here, she replied, her voice polite but tight. So, let's talk about the new album, Carson began. It's been getting incredible reviews, and fans are saying it's some of your most personal work yet. Can you tell us about the inspiration behind it? Kelly's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, Carson, as you know, I've been through some significant life changes recently, she said evenly. The album reflects a lot of that journey, the ups and downs. The real stuff that people don't always want to talk about in interviews like this. Carson nodded, sensing a faint edge in her tone, but pressing forward with his prepared questions. Absolutely, and I think that's what makes your music so relatable. Now, I have to ask about the song Breaking Point. The lyrics are pretty intense. Is that about your recent divorce? Kelly's expression hardened. You know what, Carson? She said sharply. I've been doing interviews all week, and every single host wants to dig into my personal life like it's some kind of entertainment for everyone else. Do you ever get tired of asking the same invasive questions? Carson blinked, clearly caught off guard by her directness. I'm sorry, Kelly. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said quickly. These are just the questions that our viewers are curious about. Curious about my pain, Kelly snapped. Curious about my children having to watch their parents' marriage fall apart in the public eye. Her voice was rising now, and the tension in the studio was palpable. Carson shifted uncomfortably under the hot studio lights as he realized the interview was slipping out of control. Kelly. I completely understand your position, he said, carefully. We don't have to discuss anything you're not comfortable with. Let's talk about something else. Maybe your upcoming tour dates or your talk show. But Kelly wasn't backing down. No, Carson. Let's not just sweep this under the rug and pretend everything is fine. You brought it up, so let's have this conversation. Do you have any idea what it's like to have your most vulnerable moments dissected by strangers for ratings? Carson's composure faltered. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone in the control room knew this was no longer a standard morning show segment. It was live. Raw and real television at its most unpredictable. Carson tried to stay composed as he began, saying he thought there might be a misunderstanding. and that he was only trying to do his job and give the audience the content they expected. Kelly laughed, but there was no humor in it as she repeated his words, telling him her divorce and struggles were not content, that she was a human being and not a commodity for his show. Carson insisted she wasn't a commodity and explained that she was there promoting her album, that the personal elements were part of what made her music meaningful, and that he wasn't trying to exploit anything. Kelly cut him off sharply, saying it certainly felt like exploitation when every interview she did focused more on her failed marriage than on the art she had spent months creating, demanding to know if he asked male artists about their divorces with the same intensity. Carson felt his professional composure beginning to crack as he said he asked all his guests about things relevant to their projects and lives. That this was what interviews were. Kelly's tone rose as she asked if her private pain was now considered relevant to selling records and if that was what journalism had become. The crew behind the cameras looked uneasy as Carson insisted he was a professional who had been doing this for over 20 years, that he knew how to conduct an interview, and that he resented being implied to be some kind of tabloid vulture. Kelly fired back that maybe, after 20 years, he should have learned the difference between asking thoughtful questions and prying into someone's trauma for shock value. The tension in the studio was thick. Carson's face was flushed, and Kelly leaned forward, eyes flashing with anger as the cameras kept rolling, capturing every second. Carson argued that she had written songs about these experiences and was promoting an album built on them, asking how it could be inappropriate to ask about the inspiration behind her own work. Kelly countered that there was a difference between asking about artistic inspiration and grilling someone about the most painful time in their life, like a prosecutor, accusing him of treating her like she was on trial instead of a guest. Carson took a deep breath, trying to regain control, suggesting they might both be getting a little heated and should take a step back. But Kelly snapped at him not to patronize her, saying he was the one who had turned the interview into an interrogation. She said she had come to talk about her music, creativity, and art. But instead, he wanted to dissect her personal life like a puzzle for his audience to solve. The audience began murmuring uncomfortably as Carson realized the interview was slipping away from him, while Kelly's publicist gestured frantically off to the side. Carson's professionalism broke as he said he had been nothing but respectful, that he had given her multiple opportunities to steer the conversation however she wanted, and that she had chosen instead to attack him personally and question his integrity. Kelly's eyes widened in disbelief as she accused him of trying to make her cry on national television about her divorce and then playing the victim. Carson fired back that he had asked about one song, reminding her that artists talked about their songs when promoting their work, and that if she didn't want to discuss personal topics, maybe she shouldn't have written an album about them. Kelly shot back that being honest in her art didn't give him the right to dissect her life like a specimen under a microscope. Carson leaned back, visibly frustrated, saying she was being unreasonable and that interviews had always worked this way, that she couldn't expect them to pretend her music existed in a vacuum. Kelly's voice trembled with emotion as she asked if wanting basic human dignity was unreasonable, if not wanting her children to watch their mother grilled on live television was too much to ask. Carson said no one was grilling her, that this was just a conversation and she was the one turning it into a confrontation, insisting he had interviewed countless artists about personal struggles and none had accused him of exploitation. Kelly suddenly stood up, her microphone nearly falling, and said maybe those artists were too polite or too desperate for publicity to call him out. But she wasn't either of those things. The camera operators exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to keep filming as the producer gestured frantically for them to cut. Neither Kelly nor Carson noticed. They were locked in their own battle. Carson's voice rose to match hers as he declared that he was one of the most respected hosts in television. Carson straightened his posture, his tone sharp with wounded pride as he declared that he had been nominated for Emmys, had won industry awards, and built a career on treating guests with respect and professionalism. He insisted that Kelly didn't get to come on his show and trash his reputation just because she was having a bad day. Kelly scoffed, repeating his words with disbelief, saying it wasn't a bad day she was having, it was a bad year. One made worse by people like him turning every interview into an opportunity to rehash her personal trauma. She asked if he had any idea how exhausting it was to constantly defend her right to privacy while trying to promote her work. Carson shot back that maybe she shouldn't put her private life in her songs if she didn't want to talk about it. That she couldn't have it both ways, profiting from her personal experiences and then getting angry when people wanted to understand the story behind them. Kelly's face flushed with fury as she asked if he really thought she was profiting from her pain. If he thought she went through a devastating divorce, watched her children's world fall apart, and struggled with depression and anxiety just to make money. Carson countered quickly, saying that wasn't what he meant. That by sharing those experiences through her art, she made them part of the public conversation. And that was simply the nature of being a public figure. Kelly's voice rose as she told him the nature of being a public figure shouldn't include having to justify her right to basic human emotion or having hosts like him treat her pain like entertainment. Asterisk. Carson stood now too, matching her energy as he demanded to know what hosts like me was supposed to mean, asking if she was suggesting he was different from every other interviewer she'd faced. He guaranteed they were all asking the same questions. Kelly snapped that maybe that was the problem, that the entire industry had forgotten celebrities were human beings with real feelings, not just content to fill airtime between commercials. Carson bristled and warned her not to lecture him about the industry, saying he'd been working in television since before she won American Idol and knew exactly how the business worked. He said success meant being able to handle questions about one's public persona and work. Kelly shot back that there was a difference between handling questions and being subjected to an emotional strip search every time she sat down for an interview, accusing him of voyeurism, not journalism. The audience was silent, some visibly uncomfortable, others mesmerized by the escalating confrontation. The tension between them was thick enough to cut through. And everyone knew this was no longer just an interview, it was personal. Asterisk. Carson's eyes narrowed. Voyeurism. He repeated incredulously, saying she was way out of line. He insisted he'd always been professional and had never crossed a boundary with a guest. Kelly's laugh was sharp and bitter as she accused him of pushing her, from the moment she sat down to break down and cry about her divorce. She said that wasn't professionalism, that was predatory behavior. Carson's face went red, his voice rising as he demanded to know if she was really accusing him of being predatory just for asking about her own music. He called her reaction insane, saying she was overreacting to a standard interview. Kelly snapped back that if this was what he considered standard, maybe he needed to take a long, hard look at what kind of interviewer he had become. She told him to ask himself when he stopped caring, viewed his guests as people, and started seeing them as sources of drama for ratings. Carson insisted he cared deeply about his guests and had relationships spanning decades, but that he also had a responsibility to his audience to ask the questions they wanted answered, that it was literally his job. Kelly countered that his job was to ask questions, not to emotionally manipulate his guests into giving him dramatic sound bites, saying there was a difference between being curious and being cruel. Asterisk. Carson was visibly shaking with anger now. Cruel, he repeated. He told her she had agreed to the interview, had known the kind of questions he would ask, and now she was trying to make him the villain because she didn't like answering for her own choices. Kelly's eyes burned as she repeated his word choices and demanded to know which choices he was referring to. The choice to get married, have children, try to save a failing marriage, or write honest music about it all. Which of those, she asked, gave him the right to treat her like garbage. The production crew was in chaos behind the scenes, assistants running frantically while the director barked into his headset. But Kelly and Carson were too caught up in their fight to notice. Carson finally snapped, his voice booming as he said, "You want to know what gives me the right? The experiences you've chosen to share with the world through your art, that's what. That's literally how interviews work." Kelly stepped closer, her tone dropping to a low, dangerous calm as she told him that just because she processed her emotions through songwriting didn't mean she'd made her private life public property. There was a difference, she said, between artistic expression and signing away her right to privacy. Carson insisted there wasn't not when she was promoting that art on national television, said she couldn't cherry-pick which parts of her story to discuss. If a song was about her divorce, he argued, then talking about her divorce was relevant. Kelly's eyes narrowed as she moved another step closer. "You know what's really relevant, Carson?" she said coldly. "The fact that you think my pain is your content. That you think because I'm famous, I owe you and your audience every painful detail of my life." Carson protested that he never said she owed anyone anything. Kelly accused him of ambushing her, saying maybe it wasn't meant to be one. But that's what it became the moment he pushed, after she made it clear she was uncomfortable. "A decent person would have backed off," she said. Carson gave a bitter laugh, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he asked if now he wasn't a decent person just for doing his job, calling her reaction ridiculous and insisting he hadn't asked anything inappropriate. Kelly told him it wasn't about what he asked, but how he asked it, and how he refused to drop it when she made her boundaries clear, accusing him of caring more about his soundbite than her comfort. Carson's temper finally snapped as he said she'd been attacking his character for 15 minutes, calling him predatory, cruel, and indecent, and yet still wanted to talk about her discomfort. At that moment, Kelly's publicist stepped forward, trying to intervene. But both Kelly and Carson turned toward them at once, their voices colliding in unison as they shouted, "Stay out of this." The publicist backed away quickly, clearly not wanting to get caught in the crossfire of their escalating confrontation. Kelly glared at Carson and said that this whole thing had shown exactly who he really was as an interviewer, and as a person, someone who cared more about creating drama than treating his guests with respect. Carson immediately fired back that it had also shown him who she really was, someone who could dish it out but couldn't take it. He accused her of writing songs about her personal life, profiting from them, and then falling apart the moment someone asked her to explain them. Kelly's eyes flashed with disbelief as she repeated his words, asking if he thought this was her falling apart. She said this wasn't weakness, it was her standing up for herself and for every other artist who had ever been subjected to his interrogation style, questioning but stayed silent because they needed the publicity. Carson scoffed at her, calling her delusional and insisting this was a morning talk show, not a criminal investigation. He said that if she couldn't handle basic questions about her own work, that said more about her than it did about him. Kelly's tone sharpened as she repeated the phrase basic questions and accused him of trying to make her cry on live television since the moment she sat down. She said that wasn't basic, it was manipulative. The fact that he couldn't see the difference was exactly the problem. Carson threw his hands up in frustration, exclaiming that he'd only asked her about one song. Everything else, he said, had been her attacking him and turning the interview into a crusade against the media. Kelly shot back that he had brought up that one song specifically to get an emotional reaction, telling him not to pretend it had been an innocent question. Carson argued that it was an innocent question about her art, and that if she couldn't discuss her creative work without having what he called a meltdown, that wasn't his fault. Kelly bristled at the word and said she wasn't having a meltdown. She was calling him out for his unprofessional behavior. Carson smirked and said that was ironic, considering she was the one yelling. He accused her of calmly and systematically trying to break down his emotional defenses for the entertainment of her fans, calling it worse than screaming, calling it calculated. Asterisk. Kelly stared at him in disbelief as he accused her of being paranoid and seeing conspiracies that weren't there. He said all he had done was ask a straightforward question about her music, and she had blown it completely out of proportion. At that, Kelly began removing her microphone, her hands shaking with anger. She told him she was done with the interview, done with his show, and done pretending this kind of treatment was acceptable. Carson rolled his eyes and said, "Fine, walk away," mocking her by saying it was a very mature way to handle a professional disagreement. Kelly shot back that her fans would be impressed. She finally stood up to a bully instead of sitting there, quietly and taking it like people expected celebrities to do. Carson stepped forward, his face inches from hers, his voice tight with anger as he said she had spent the entire interview attacking his character, questioning his professionalism, and now she was calling him names. He told her that if anyone was being a bully, it was her. Kelly replied coldly that if that made her a bully in his mind, then she was proud to be one. Asterisk. Carson's voice rose as he accused her of being insane, reminding her that he wasn't her therapist or her friend, but a television host asking questions about her public statements and work. Kelly ripped off her microphone and threw it down on the chair, saying that was exactly the problem. He wasn't her friend. He didn't care about her as a person, and he only saw her as content for his show. She thanked him for finally admitting it. Carson shouted back that wasn't what he said, and she knew it, accusing her of twisting his words just to feel justified about storming off like a child. Kelly turned toward the exit, but then stopped and spun back around, glaring at him one last time. She said she hoped his audience saw exactly what kind of person he really was, how he treated people when they didn't give him exactly what he wanted, and how he reacted when someone asked him to be accountable for his own behavior. Asterisk. Carson gave a cold smile and said the moment had certainly been revealing. Kelly replied that it had indeed been revealing, then turned and walked off the set. The studio fell silent as Carson stood alone in front of the cameras, the audience stunned and unsure how to react. Millions of viewers at home watched in disbelief as one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history unfolded live. After a long pause, Carson looked directly into the camera, his composure returning as he said, "Well, that was certainly unexpected. We'll be right back after this commercial break." As the feed cut away, the studio erupted into chaos, producers running around, assistants shouting, and crew members trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show while Carson stood frozen in place, still processing what had just happened. What had started as a routine promotional interview had spiraled into a fiery debate about media ethics, celebrity privacy, and the boundaries of entertainment journalism. Both Kelly and Carson had stood their ground, neither willing to back down, resulting in one of the most unforgettable moments ever seen on morning television.